As you've likely heard by now, Twitter is under new management. And in the short time since Elon Musk took over, then fired the whole board, giving himself total control, the platform has already grown more toxic. And the real-life consequences of that are growing more concerning. While Twitter has never been known as a bastion of civil discourse, since news of Musk's takeover broke, a social media research group found a 500% increase in use of the N-word as racist trolls think they can now get away with it, and so far, many have. In fact, Twitter suspended certain content moderation tools, according to Bloomberg News, and quote, most people who work in Twitter's trust and safety organization are currently unable to alter or penalize accounts that break rules around misleading information, offensive posts, and hate speech in a majority of cases. And the timing could not be worse. A week out from Election Day, with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband still recovering from a brutal beating spurred by online conspiracy theories, at least one of which was briefly spread by the self-proclaimed chief twit himself, Elon Musk. So is this another nail in the coffin of American democracy? I'm joined by Michelle Amazine. She's the director of the Communication Research Center at BU, and Arkan Fung, director of the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation at Harvard's Kennedy School. It's good to have you both. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Michelle, starting with you, for the dwindling number of us who actually still care about the preservation of democracy in this country, how much concern should we have about Musk's takeover of Twitter?
Well, I think it's definitely a concern when one individual takes over such an important platform in our society. At the same time, I think we also need to keep in mind that less than 25% of Americans use Twitter.
Well, but I would say back to that, only 5 million people at its peak watch Fox News every night, and its impact goes far beyond those 5 million people, does it not?
Well, it does, and that's why it's important for us to take into consideration our media architecture, our media infrastructure. So with social media sites such as Twitter, they can easily pick up information from fringe websites, amplify it, and then the mainstream media amplifies it even more.
It does indeed. Arkan, how concerned are you about Musk's new role?
I am concerned about Musk's new role, but Twitter was never an ideal public square to begin with. And in terms of billionaire control, I think, many of the social platforms and many of the legacy media organizations, from the Hearst papers to the Washington Post to the New York Times, were also controlled by very wealthy private individuals.
So where does that leave you, Arkan? I mean, for example, I have spoken to the former editor of the Washington Post and the current editor of the Boston Globe, the latter of which is owned by a very wealthy man, John Henry, the former of which is owned by an uber wealthy individual, Jeff Bezos. And both editors told me they infused a lot of money into the papers and gave total freedom to the editors and reporters to do what they did, that they couldn't be doing the kind of journalism they were doing without that kind of support.
And I think therein lies the critical difference, is what is the motivation of management and control. And many of the legacy newspapers benefit from a motivation of professional journalism and actually getting to the truth. Whereas social media, not just Twitter, but a lot of social media, the main motivation is to maximize ad revenues. And that has, if there has any relation to the truth, that's completely incidental.
Can we talk about ad revenues for a second, Michelle? I think most people have learned, if they didn't know in the last few days, 90% of the revenues for Twitter come from advertising. General Motors suspended its advertising, even though most people think it's because they're a competitor with Tesla more than an act of great principle. But even if it didn't become the free-for-all hellscape, to use Musk's words, that he promised advertisers it would not become, even if it did become that and they left and they didn't advertise, is it possible that Musk doesn't really care about the money? He more cares about having a platform to elect a Donald Trump, or what he says, the guy he says is his favorite candidate, Ron DeSantis. Is that not possible?
I guess it's possible. I think his main motivation is profit. He wants to I guess, reconfigured Twitter in some respects to maximize profit. He sees it as having, it's not being properly utilized or properly configured, and he believes he's the guy to turn it around and to make it more profitable by adding different features. We hear now that they're going to be charging for verification services. So he does want to pivot away, not pivot away. He wants to add on to all the ad revenue by having subscription-based services.
But is it, Archon, I don't know if you buy Michelle's thesis, but it seems to me that relaxing content moderation is not the way to attract new advertisers. It's a way to scare them off the platform, no?
Well, I think his motivations, whether it's profit maximization or advancing what his political views, will become clear later. I don't think we know what those are exactly, but either of those views is horribly damaging to democracy, whether it's profit maximization or a billionaire advancing his political views using the world's biggest megaphone. Both are terrible for democracy.
For those who don't quite understand yet, I mean, it's easy to understand a 500% increase in the appearance of the N-word. But for those, I've spoken to a lot of people who say, well, I don't really quite understand what's the consequence of lax moderation. I would say the first example that I took away was Musk himself. And we can put up, he retweeted in response to something Hillary Clinton said about the assault on Nancy Pelosi's husband. He tweeted, there's a tiny possibility there might be more to the story than meets the eye. And of course, he was referring to a piece in the discredited Santa Monica Observer, a scandalous story about whatever went on. And 3 hours later, Michelle, he pulled it down. I would argue if the rules that existed before Musk took over were still in place about encouraging violence, he would have had to ban himself from his own damn site. So is that not a really ominous sign that one of the first tweets we see from Musk himself?
It absolutely is. I would say, Elon, don't post unverified news.
What do you worry most, Archon, what do you worry most about in terms of this content, the moderation relaxation, which seems to be the greatest concern of the greatest number of observers of Twitter's operation?
Yeah, I think that what I worry about is the downsizing of teams that are whose purpose it is to make Twitter a better place. And part of that is the moderation to prevent hate and harm. I would love it if there were 200 engineers at Twitter who were for a full-time job thinking about how can we make Twitter a place that's good for democracy, where people listen to each other, where they try to find out true things, and they try to do their civic job.
There's a long-term issue here too, Archon, but it seems to me the most dangerous immediate concern is the immediate future. We have 7 days till an election. Could Musk's control of the platform generate the kind of misinformation that many of us fear are determining outcomes these days in such a short period of time?
I would be more worried about how things shape up for 2024. I think it's possible that things could get a lot worse in the 7 days, but there's many channels for misinformation in that short amount of time.
Michelle, speaking of 2024, Donald Trump, as the case, praised Musk's takeover, said he was not interested. He loves Truth Social, but of course, you count the numbers. He's got 4 million followers on Truth Social. He had 88 million followers on Twitter, so I'm assuming he would want back if Musk were to say you're welcome back, which he has intimated he would do. As a matter of public policy, I totally support the notion of banning citizen Trump because of the danger he poses to democracy and the encouragement of violence. Can a platform like Twitter make a case that a candidate, Trump, should he declare for the presidency, should be barred from the site as opposed to just putting warnings on some of the things he says?
I'm sure they could make that case.
Should they?
That he should be, candidate Trump should be banned?
If he decides to run, is there a public policy argument that even a candidate for president should be banned from a site that is as huge as this is?
Well, I think, sure, there could be that case. If the candidate is inciting violence, and we're seeing real world consequences of misinformation leading to people being attacked, as Paul Pelosi was, I think that there is a case for that.
Archon, do you agree with that?
I think there's a case for that. Many of my friends and colleagues, I think, would agree with that case. I don't happen to agree with that particular case. I think if Donald Trump became a candidate, he ought to have access to major social media platforms. Those platforms should put up content warnings of all kinds, and there should be very robust opportunities to respond. Otherwise, I think the conversation goes into pretty dark places.
You know, for the last couple of minutes we have, Michelle and Archon, could you speak, starting with you, Michelle, if you were sort of the czar of social media platforms like this, what would you do to address the concerns you have of an Elon Musk, not just Musk at Twitter, but similar sorts of things? What could be done to protect free speech without the kind of free speech that has great potential to cause great damage to our society? Is there anything that can be done?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question, Jim. I don't think there's an easy answer. I would advise Elon to gather a diverse advisory board who can counsel him on different considerations for this. I don't think there's an easy answer, which is why we're still grappling with this for years now.
So, Archon, do you have an answer, easy or not? I mean, as you know, one of the few things for different reasons that both Biden and Trump agreed upon was the repeal of that Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which basically said that the owners of platforms like Twitter are immune from suit for third-party content. Is that a solution, or is there a solution, Archon?
Well, I agree with Michelle that there's no simple solution. I think the very first step is that Elon Musk and owners of other large social media platforms need to say, we have a large public responsibility to do what we can for democracy, and we have been doing very, very little to fulfill that responsibility. And the only way for that to happen is for, I believe, outside pressure, public policy pressure from government, pressure from citizens who are upset about how social media is creating a toxic communication environment.
Well, quickly, Archon, what's the stick that government and average people, users of Twitter, have to effectuate change? What do they have?
They could regulate. I would love to see a 1% tax on all social media profit to fund fact-based journalism for you and many others in your business. At the end of World War II, I think a bunch of US companies media companies got it together to do their bit for democracy because they were looking at Europe and the BBC, and they said, we didn't want to be socialized. We want to remain private companies. And so they did embrace a social responsibility to do good for democracy.
Michelle Amazine, Archon Fung, unfortunately I'm out of time, Michelle. I'll have to do it next time, but thank you both for your thoughts. I really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.